I'm so glad so many of you stayed for the lunch today. I'm very, very excited to share with you our partner in crime, I should say, is Ryan Stringfield. He's here from Pathways to Life. And Pathways to Life is located in the Atlanta area, and they are the group that we partnered with to kick off this new curriculum. So with no further ado, I will introduce you to Ryan. Let's give him a warm Texas welcome.
All right. I think I got this here. Can y'all hear me? Okay, hold on. I'm getting schooled on this. All right. I guess I'm kind of a rookie at this. Hello, can y'all hear me? Here, how about this?
There you go.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so good morning, or rather should I say good afternoon. It's truly an honor for me to be able to be here and share a little bit with you this morning, and I've got several opportunities to have conversations with some of y'all, and it's just been great to be able to connect and to be able to be a part and to partner with YMSL in this season is super exciting for us. As I was kind of reflecting a little bit this morning, I'm really kind of blown away with kind of how my life and the work that I get to do and what that was really connected to for me, which is kind of my story, has now turned into such an incredible opportunity to engage so many folks. And so thrilled to be able to partner with YMSL. And so Pathways to Life I'm actually the founder of Pathways to Life. And so in order to understand Pathways to Life, you'll have to learn a little bit about my story. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of that. But really, I want to introduce you to our organization. And the heart of that is that youth would be empowered to recognize risks, to choose wisely, and live purposefully. And so another significant thing about my story and why this is so connected to my heart and my passion is that I'm a person in long-term recovery. And so what that means for me, that it's been a little bit over almost 14 years this May, since I've been in active addiction to drugs and alcohol. Yeah, thank you so much. And so I'm really, in 2001, I was in a very bad place, okay? I had been in active addiction for about 6 or 7 years. I had transitioned from high school to college, and I had a scholarship to wrestle. I moved from Orlando, Florida to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to Georgia State University. But where I was at in my life, as far as my using and kind of dealing with life and my skills for dealing with life, I wasn't in a very good place. And so when I made that transition, I kind of hit a tailspin where I really started to kind of suffer and struggle on a different degree. So I failed out the first semester, ended up having the coach say, let's redshirt and we'll get you back engaged, and promising to kind of pull it back together and get it together, but not really able to do that. And so then it started a series of legal consequences for me. And every time I would get in legal trouble, I'd be like, man, I'm going to pull this thing together, and my parents would help me out. But what was happening was I never was really addressing the core of what was going on with me, but also even the neurology of what was going on with me. And so needless to say, I continued to progress in my use. And so on May 16, 2001, my life got invaded by the police, and I ended up, like I said, going to prison. In that place, I had a spiritual encounter with the God of my understanding, and really brought new hope and perspective to my journey. But then a lot of soul searching of like, how the heck did I get here? So through my recovery, what I learned is that I didn't really have the skills that I needed in a lot of ways to deal with what I was going through. And so I was basically left to my own resources, right, which was limited. So part of my recovery, the incredible thing about my recovery is now I get to have incredible work that I get to be a part of, but also I'm married. And so this is my wife, Pamela, and my 2 boys, Asa and Josiah. And so when I think about all the things that came out of my recovery, which was the skills that I needed and the understanding to how to have healthy relationships, right? And so I was able to reestablish, like, how do I literally have a healthy relationship with somebody? And then other things that happened for me was I developed a relationship with the God of my understanding and a thriving spiritual life. And then I found a pathway towards education and training and meaningful work. Part of my recovery was rediscovering my passions and goals as a young person, which was to be a coach and a teacher. And now, leaning into those. but then also the incredible opportunity to leverage those things to work with others, to hope, to prevent those things from happening to other people. And so when I talk about addiction and some of the things that we talk about in society, a lot of times there's a misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstanding around mental health problems and addiction. And so it can make it really difficult for our young people, especially navigating, risk if they don't have a good understanding of addiction and how it happens. And so one of my passions is helping people get an understanding, an awareness of what are the risks and what are the challenges and how to make healthy choices in the face of those challenges. And so part of my story, when I started to dive into the recovery part of it, I ended up going back into my childhood. And what I found is that there was a lot of amazing things that were going on in my life, like early experiences that shaped kind of my understanding of value, like my first experience with sports. And the first couple of years, I was very gifted. So I got a lot of positive affirmation in that. And so what it did for me was it gave me a lot of upside and hope in that, but it also caused me to be really performance-based, right? And then also praise-seeking. And so when I started to struggle with other things like pushing the boundaries with my parents, right, then I started to isolate in behaviors, right? And so I'd have that guilt and shame. I'm like breaking the rules, but then I started to hide out because I didn't want to disappoint. And so those early things became, I think areas of risk for me. Also, navigating issues like pornography. So I had an early exposure to pornography and how that impacted my life and caused me to even pursue in my relationships at a young person, like exploring kind of sexually active and what does that look like as a young man, and then how that would cause shame, right, and guilt for me. And so, but I didn't know how to communicate that with other people, so I isolated in those things. And so what I found is in my life, when I looked at my recovery, there was a lot of areas where I had these problems, right? And so when I got exposed to alcohol and drugs, I didn't really see it as a problem, right? So we talk to kids about drugs and alcohol all the time. And so they hear adult experiences teaching about these things, and then they have an experience, and it's something very different from what they hear. And they're like, well, I didn't experience that. This is incredible, right? I got to connect with my peers, and we had fun, and all these things. And so in my life, what I found was I didn't necessarily initially have a drug problem, but had all these other problem areas. And drugs and alcohol kind of started to become a solution for me early in my life. In my first experience with alcohol, just like pornography, I wasn't planning on drinking alcohol, but I ended up in an environment with my peers, and there it was, and I was forced with the choice, and then I made the choice to use, and then it changed my perspective. So it was like, oh, okay, I don't know why people want to keep us from this stuff. And so, I know, right? And so it created more upside for me in that. So the thing about my life, so I tell the early stories, and the reason why, I'm not going to give you all the details, but the reason why is because I believe that every kid is at risk for developing problems, right? But a lot of times nobody connects that they could be the one. And also one of the biggest risk areas for all people, and for me, and I think your young people, is that they have all kinds of people around them, but they're really alone, right? And that's where we have those secrets, the things that we don't want to disappoint. I was talking to some moms just recently, and it was like, where are the areas of problem? And I'm like, well, it's the things that you know that are the expectations have been set, and it's not acceptable. Those are the types of things that your kids keep secrets with, right? They don't want to disappoint you. What's going on with their friends, right? They don't want you to know, because if you know, then you're gonna, get in. You're gonna get in the way and intrude in their life. What they're looking at on technology, because then you're gonna take it away from them, right? What they're listening to. And so the areas where we're at our greatest risk is the areas where we're alone. And so for me, in a lot of ways, the using progressed over the years, but it was those things that I was alone with, myself with, that became the greatest areas of risk. I always tell young people, if you do something in your life and it makes you feel real good, what's the tendency? What you want to do it again, right? And so it's the progression where it gets dangerous, right? And the progressive nature of things in our lives and experience. And so for me, it progressed, and throughout my high school years, it progressively increased. And my problem areas were like summertime or spring break, winter break, those areas. But because I was really successful in sports, it wasn't really showing up. I was popular. I didn't have trouble making friends. And so on the outside, it looked like I was doing really good, but on the inside, I was really struggling. I was dealing with a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of rejection, a lot of anxiety, but I was just kind of dealing with it in my own way. And so when I graduated, the last semester of school, I basically, I had a huge breakup with my high school sweetheart. My goal was to be a state champion in wrestling. I made it to the semifinals, and I lost the state, semifinal match, and I injured my knee, and then I wrestled back the next match, and I lost again, and then now my confidence was gone. All right, now this is hindsight, looking back, my confidence was gone. And so the last semester of school, my using started to shift differently. I got a letter saying I wasn't going to graduate. I had 11 days unexcused absences. And I was able to go to the administration and the people around me, my parents, to get those absences excused. And I also minimized why I was missing and all that kind of stuff. And so what I got excused absences, but what I really needed was intervention. I needed somebody in it with me. And so the natural progression for me was when I went to college, I wasn't able to sustain, and follow through with reaching my potential in that. And so the important thing that we want to do as far as for young people, and I'm going to introduce a little bit about the curriculum, and we'll be back in January. You'll get to hear a little bit more of my story, and we'll be doing some stuff to help have some people on my staff that are moms help train y'all and equip y'all for engaging your young people. But if we're foolish to think that we can just set boundaries, right, and that our kids and our expectations, and that's just going to be enough for our kids, right? We're not going to take the necessary effort to really engage them and hopefully influence their decision, right? Because we already know that our kids have access to a lot of really difficult stuff, right? And so we live in a day and time where what's accessible has become what's acceptable, right? So if you think about that, you think about technology and all the things that powerful tool gives us, think about the content, right? That they can get and the information they can get to support any decision they want to make. What about the legalization of marijuana and the complications with that, because it's medicine and it's legal places, right? So that means there's no harm. And then the whole vaping craze is what I call it, which is taking on like wildfire. Like, how do we help prepare our kids to navigate these choices and understand that it's not necessarily the behavior, but it's what they're looking for in those things, right? How do they handle success? And how do they understand limitations? Like, we all have limitations, right? How do I deal with things that are going on with me that are not easy to talk about, right? And so the video curriculum that we're about to introduce to y'all is really going to be some brief education with some life skill application stuff to it, but really hopefully it's going to be about creating a culture where you begin to talk, right? We begin to lean in with our kids to help them be empowered to navigate the choices they're going to make.
What's up, guys? My name is Fly. I'm so excited. I'm hanging out with Ryan today, and today we're talking about addiction. And Ryan, I just want to kick it off from the jump. What is addiction?
There's a lot of baggage around this idea of addiction,
wow.
Right? We believe that addiction is a disease, and it's a disease that impacts the brain, okay? And here's how it changes. What happens is that when people, they develop addiction over a period of time, people use alcohol and drugs, and then they continue to use over a period of time, it literally changes the structure and function of your brain. It literally changes how your brain communicates with the rest of the body. Once a person is used, right, drugs or alcohol, the impact that it has on your brain and body, it tends to make people feel high, right? Or to be able to feel this experience of pleasure, right? So naturally in our lives, when we experience something pleasurable, there a lot of times it's something that we want to experience again. So people are kind of chasing that feeling again, right? So they continue to use more. And then what happens is your body starts to develop what's called a tolerance. So in order to get that same effect, you have to do it more frequently, right? You have to use more frequently, but you also have to increase the amount that you're using. And that's when a person becomes, at more risk for developing addiction, right? The more that they do it, the more that their tolerance increase, so then the more that they do it and the more that they want it. And so that's what happens when somebody gets addicted.
So Ryan, since addiction is truly a disease, what do we do about it?
Right. So again, like I said before, the first thing we need to do is we need to clearly define it so that in educating people that they really understand what it is, okay? So the actual definition is that addiction is a disease that is chronic, that is progressive, and that it can even be fatal, okay? And so chronic meaning that it's ongoing, right? And that progressive meaning that once somebody starts, because it feels good, they continue to pursue use. And then fatal is that if it's not interrupted, that it can even lead to death, all right? Now, the other good news about that is that because it is a disease, then we now know how to prevent it and also how to effectively treat it, right? So there is hope.
So I want to go back to the word disease, because you said that. And when I
Right.
think of disease, and when a lot of people think of disease, they don't think of addiction.
Right.
Like, break that down. How is addiction a disease?
So if you think about, like, for example, heart disease, cancer, or diabetes, what happens is you have biological risk factors, these factors that you're born with, right? So it's a part of your family history. So now you have these biological factors, and then you have your lifestyle choices, and the combination of those two things, right? Your choices, like, so for diabetes, it'd be like your consumption of sugar. Right? For heart disease, it might be, the type of food that you eat, the amount of exercise that you participate in, whether you smoke or not. Yeah. So what happens is that you have these risk factors, then you have your choices, right? And how you engage. And the combination of those two things is actually what gives somebody your outcome.
So you talked about risk a little bit. And
Right.
I want to dive in deeper when you're talking about risk. Is there only one type of risk, or is there, you said two type of risk? Tell me more about the risk.
There's two types of risk.
Okay.
There's those that you can change, right? The risk factors that you can change and those that you can't change, all right? So let's start with the ones that you can't change. Like, for example, your biology. You can't change. You don't have any say in your family history, right? You're born with it, okay? And then also, so the first risk factor really in understanding addiction is your family history, your DNA. Like what you inherit through your family. Now, here's the barrier with that is because there's such a stigma with people having addiction, that a lot of times it's hidden in your family.
That's
right?
true. That's so true.
It's hidden because people don't understand like what's actually happening in someone's brain is that their brain has been taken over by the drugs and alcohol. And so it's literally controlling all the decisions that they make or influencing.
So those are the risks that we cannot change. What about the risks that we can change?
All right, so before we get into the ones that we can change, let's talk about the other factors like the age and stage of use. So in this country, there's like all this research that's being done around addiction. There's like 40 million people that have developed the disease of addiction. All right. All right. So now what they found in that research is that 9 out of 10 of people that developed the disease of addiction started using addictive substances under the age of 18.
Wow.
So we know that people that are under the age of 18 are at the highest risk for developing this disease through introducing drugs and alcohol to their system, right? So it comes through underage drug and alcohol use. And so you can choose whether you use or not, but you can't choose how those drugs interact with your brain and your biology.
Wow.
Right? And so you get drunk or you get high, and different people have different reactions to different things. Right? So like you can have one person smoke weed and they get real chill. You can have somebody else smoke weed and they get real paranoid.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's because of their biology, right? So you have your brain and your biology. Those are the things you can't change.
All right, so Ryan, I want you to tell me a little bit about how risk and choices kind of coincide together when it comes to addiction.
So for me, my dad was an alcoholic, okay? So because just by the sheer fact that he was an alcoholic, it represented additional risk for me. So a person who has alcoholism or addiction in their family has a 4 times increased biological risk.
Oh, wow.
Before even using, okay?
Wow.
Now, what it doesn't mean is that somebody's predestined to become an alcoholic. It's actually got to be activated through your choice.
That's good.
If we can get people to put off their use until after their 18th birthday or even after their 21st birthday, then the likelihood of them developing a problem drastically drops just by the stage of development their brain is in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's one risk and how it relates to choice.
All right, Ryan, so I heard you talk to us a little bit about the biological factors, the age and stage factors. But are there any more risks that we need to be aware of and pay attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. So our third category that we like to educate people on is understanding your psychological risk, all right? So your psychological risk are going to be things like related to your personality. They're going to be related to kind of anxiety or depression. They're going to be related to how you handle stress or grief. They're going to be related to things like learning disabilities or different challenges that you might have, like mental health challenges that you could have. And the reason why those factors are important is because a lot of times what happens is that if you have this vulnerability, right, one of these vulnerabilities, they tend to create stress in your life.
Wow.
There's or distress, right? Because navigating life with a vulnerability, right, creates additional challenges. And so what happens is those psychological factors can actually set someone up in that distress or in that feeling of stress connected to those factors can make them want to pursue finding relief. All right, so you have those psychological factors. And then the other category, the fourth category that we talk about is the environmental factors. Okay. And those are like, is there an addicted person in your household, right? Wow. Yeah. And those are the social factors, like are there people using alcohol and drugs in your friend group, right? Because a person that has access and exposure to people that are using on a regular basis, they're going to be drawn towards that type of engagement. And then lastly, our last risk factor and the fifth and final one is types of drugs. All right. So, and the reason with types of drugs is just because different types of drugs present different types of risk. For example, like right now we're facing what's been labeled as a opioid crisis in America. And so there's a direct connection between the opioid crisis and the sheer fact that we're prescribing pain medicine. Oh, wow. And here's what I mean. So like when you have, say you're a teenager and you have a surgery on your mouth to get your wisdom teeth taken out, what they're doing is they're prescribing opiate-based medication, right? This opiate-based medication, although it is good at relieving pain, it's highly addictive, right? And so a lot of the overdose crisis, a lot of the opiate, the increase of people being impacted by opiates is directly connected to the strength of that medication and how it impacts the brain, all right? And so and the other thing is there's other drugs like street drugs like cocaine or methamphetamines or even heroin. These drugs are not regulated by a pharmacy, okay? So you don't know how potent they are. Yeah. You don't know the degree, right, of potency that these substances have. So a person can use and they can trigger addiction more rapidly. And it's all connected to the types of drugs. Different types of drugs create different types of risk.
Well, I want to thank you, Ryan, for educating us today because I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned a lot about addiction. And I want to leave you with this question right here. Could you or do you identify with any risks of addictions in your life right now?
That is just one of the 4 videos that we have available for you guys. I'm going to not take time today to show you, but we have additional support video on how to teach the curriculum. And then what we're going to ask you to do is partner with people in your communities to try to help share their story, which will make this curriculum more impactful. We will be putting out all of the information on how to access this and launch this here shortly. We didn't want to release it before the event today because we wanted to share this with you, and then we will come up with a game plan for you, and it will come through your VP Boys coordinators. And Ryan, do you want to close with anything, and while I get myself back together for the rest of the presentation?
No, are we doing question and answer now?
Yeah. Okay, let's do some questions and answers. Does anybody want to? I don't know if the mics are out there or not, but here I can. Yeah.
Am I ready? Okay, so my question is, I just saw a documentary called Take the Pill on Netflix.
Yeah.
And it discusses cognitive enhancement drugs like those prescribed for ADD and ADHD. So are you going to address any of that in your curriculum or?
In order to really address like all the different types of substances, it would really take a lot of time. I mean, I would definitely, I saw that documentary. I would recommend that every person in this room watch that documentary just because of the sheer fact that ADHD medicines are one of the #1 prescriptions abused by young people. And the reason why it's not getting as much publicity as the opioid crisis is because people aren't overdosing on methamphetamines. They're overdosing on opiate-based medication or heroin or fentanyl, one of the other drugs that that is connected to that. So I would recommend that everyone watch it, but in order to really cover all the types of drugs, it would really take a long, long time. And so I'm hoping that in your individual chapters that you will become informed, and then even expose your children to it too, because I guarantee you, I did a presentation last week at a public high school, and I brought a family in, a dad that lost 2 daughters, one to a drunk driving accident and one to an overdose. And I asked him, I said, can you tell me a little bit about your children's drug use and what you know about it? And what he said is that they had got Adderall from somebody to help them study for a final. And that was their first exposure that he knew about. And when he said it, I was sitting on the stage, you could see kids like elbowing each other. And so just know that that's, one of the drugs that's readily abused by young people. They share it with their friends. The kids know what other kids are on it, and so they solicit them and ask them for it. I've seen kids, they trade homework for that. They'll trade stuff, they'll barter for it. So it's definitely something that's an issue. It's a good question.
I was just wondering, why isn't this in the schools? Because I was prior military. I was stationed overseas. I was on the DOD schools, and based on my job, I had an oversight of all this stuff. And I really think there's a need for parents to be educated, because just like you say, a lot of parents, I ran the clinics in Japan. I don't want to go into it, but one of the things that we noticed was parents not having that communication line with their kids. And maybe we need a parenting class for grit, for parents. Because a lot of parents would come to me, I couldn't disclose some of the things that their kids were telling me based on the HIPAA and all the other stuff. But I really think they have a need for this, because the hardest thing is when you see a parent heartbroken from the outcomes of this stuff. And yes, I did do the ADHD clinics too, and that Adderall thing, parents really, we weren't allowed to say anything, but that needs to be a big discussion.
Yeah.
Because I don't think parents realize, we saw it as healthcare providers, the impact on what it was doing to kids.
Yeah.
But the parent was so happy that little Johnny was sitting in the corner doing what we tell them to do, that, yeah, it's a big problem. And we see it in the military too, especially overseas. So I think this needs to go nationwide and back in the schools.
Yeah, amen. I agree. My organization, we're in 17 schools in the metro Atlanta area. And so what we do primarily is life skills. So it's really educating, giving understanding about addiction, but also helping kids understand their risk and the life skills. How do I protect my passions through setting goals? How do I understand how I'm wired to make decisions, and what are the things that influence the decisions that I make? Emotions, what are they? How do I identify what I'm feeling and what feedback it's given me, which is going to be in our emotional video. And so helping kids with those cognitive skills and those, social emotional skills, like how do I communicate to someone that cares about me, what's going on with me, right? And the only time anybody asked me about my drug use and what was going on with me is when I was in trouble. So what do you think I told them? As little as possible, because I wanted to minimize the consequences, okay? And so part of this is creating a culture where we're talking about it and where we're normalizing it, as people are dealing with stuff, and so that our kids feel more comfortable sharing what's going on with them. That's really good. Yes, please, schools, open up and let us come in.
Yeah, we'll switch. One of the reasons that we chose Partners to Life is because they were a preventative program. We felt like they had already had invented great curriculum that was being used in schools, middle school and high schools, and they have a phenomenal program in place there. There aren't a lot of those types of programs in the United States right now that are preventative in nature. And so that was the reason we thought we're trying to prevent something from the future for our young men, and that's why we did this partnership.
I just have a question about how the curriculum gets applied through YMSL. So I heard you talk earlier about the boys being presented the videos and things like that. Will the moms have access to see that so that we can have those communication and those conversations at home? Like, that was an excellent video that I would love to say, you know, hey, tell me about the video, even though like I've seen it and I can have that dialogue about it. But I didn't hear you earlier talk about how the moms are involved, so I was just curious about
We're
that.
going to work on a mom's doing both. We want to, the big meeting in January we're going to do for all the chapters and everything is going to be primarily for boys. So then we were thinking, one, we're going to we just recorded this whole session, and we're going to share that for moms meetings to share within your chapters of Ryan speaking. And then we can talk about access for moms meetings for these videos too. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. So we're open to suggestions. If you want to email me directly, I'm president at ymslnational.org. And Nancy Reyes is also going to be working on this in the Boys Committee. So we really would love your suggestions for it. And I'm going to we're going to have to move on because we got a couple things left, and then I know everybody needs to leave. You have one more question? Sorry.
Just one more question, because a lot of our boys' meetings are off-site, so not necessarily connected to the internet. And I think as we think through it and work through it as this being new, because obviously a very valuable tool for them, just a way for them to access that on off-site meetings with no Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we'll make sure that that's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Ryan, so much.